The whisper was a silken thing, sharp as a stiletto, and it found Beatrice Templeton precisely where she was most vulnerable. In the shadowed alcove she had mistaken for a sanctuary. Lady Albrighta's ball was a crushing symphony of jewels and noise, and Beatrice, in her gown of pale, apologetic gray, felt like a sparrow that had wandered into a parliament of peacocks. She had been ruined for 2 seasons now, a social ghost, permitted to haunt the edges of drawing rooms out of a distant familial pity, but never to dance. A fortnight, the voice amended, laced with the brittle amusement of Lady Wexhall. The Duke of Vane might be intrigued by the novelty of a ruined woman, but she has all the conversation of a prayer book. Shall bore him in a fortnight. Beatrice's fingers tightened on the cool marble of the window ledge. The city lights of London glittered below, a sprawling constellation of indifferent stars. She did not need to see them to know who they were. Lady Wexhall and her sister, Lady Eleanor Carmody, the undisputed queens of this glittering, merciless world. Eleanor had once been her friend. Before the crime, Beatrice knew, was not that the Duke had spoken to her. The crime was that he had passed by Lady Wexhall, had offered only a cool, cursory nod to a gaggle of brightly plumed debutantes, and had sought her out. He had found her near the wilting floral arrangements, where she had been quietly helping a flustered footman mop a spill of champagne, her own grey silk hem already damp. He had not offered platitudes, he had not offered pity. He had simply stood there, a tall, contained silence in the chaos, and said, "That was a kindness." Duke Lucius Vane was a man made of winter. He had a reputation for a cutting wit and an unnerving stillness that unnerved society. Far more than any outburst would, people orbited him, drawn to his title and his stark, unnerving grace, but no one ever seemed to get close. He was the season's great prize and its greatest enigma, and he had spoken to her, twice. The first time to ask if she was enjoying the music, the second, after the spill, to offer that quiet observation. Now, the verdict was being delivered in the alcove behind her. She did not move. Moving would be an admission of having heard. She had learned in 2 years of social exile that stillness was her only armor. Her father's ruin, a catastrophic mess of bad investments and worse horses, had stripped her of fortune and prospects. A subsequent, vicious lie whispered by a spurned suitor had stripped her of her name. All she had left was a quiet, unyielding dignity. She, polished each night like her last piece of silver. It is a perversity. Lady Wexhall, continued her voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur, he is amusing himself, like a man picking up a curious stone, only to see how it feels in his hand. He will drop it just as quickly. A cold knot formed in Beatrice's stomach, a curious stone. That was what she was. An object of fleeting interest, notable only for her damage. The cruelty of the image was so precise, so exquisitely aimed, that it stole her breath. She should leave. She should slip away down the servants' stairs if she must, and find her way back to the cramped, borrowed rooms she shared with her aunt. But her feet felt rooted to the floor. To move now would be to flee, and she was so very tired of fleeing. Then, a new voice entered the alcove, low and resonant, cutting through the venomous whispers like a cold, clean blade. "A cruelty seems already abundant this evening," the Duke of Vane said. "I see no reason to add mine." The silence that fell was absolute. It was a weighted, shocked silence, the kind that follows the fall of a guillotine. Beatrice could picture it perfectly. The sisters, their mouths slightly agape, their fans frozen mid-flutter. She felt a tremor run through her, a strange mix of terror and a fierce, unfamiliar thrill. She made herself turn slowly. He was standing at the entrance to the alcove, one hand resting lightly on the velvet drapery. The candlelight from the ballroom behind him threw his face into sharp relief, carving hollows beneath his cheekbones, and making his eyes, a startlingly clear gray, seem almost black. He was not looking at the 2 ladies. He was looking directly at her. He saw the flush that had risen to her cheeks, the way her hands were clenched into fists at her sides. He saw the faint trembling of her lip she was so desperately trying to control. His gaze was not pitying, it was appraising, steady, and strangely terribly calm. Lady Wexhall was the first to recover, letting out a tinkling artificial laugh. "Your Grace, we were just commenting on the chill." "From the window, indeed," the Duke said. His voice was devoid of inflection. He did not acknowledge her lie, nor did he challenge it. He simply let it hang in the air, a dead and flimsy thing. He took a step into the alcove, his presence seeming to shrink the already small space. He noticed the damp hem of Beatrice's gown. He noticed the faint smudge of dust on her fingertips from the marble ledge. He noticed the way she held her chin a fraction too high, a soldier's posture on a girl who should have been dancing. His eyes returned to hers. "Miss Templeton, my apologies for the intrusion." The apology was for her, not for them. The distinction was deliberate. It was a statement. In that single, quiet moment, he had drawn a line in the sand, placing himself on her side of it. Lady Eleanor, paler than usual, stammered, Your Grace. We were just leaving." "An excellent notion," he said, his gaze still fixed on Beatrice. The sisters scurried away, a rustle of silk and panicked indignation. They did not look back. They did not dare. The silence they left behind was different. It was no longer heavy and suffocating, but light, breathable. It hummed with unspoken things. Your Grace," Beatrice managed, her voice a little unsteady. You should not have, should not have what?" he asked, his tone still quiet. Prevented two vipers from sinking their fangs into a sparrow." It seemed the very least a man could do. The image was so close to her own that it startled a small, genuine smile from her. "I am not a sparrow, Your Grace." "No," he agreed, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. You are not. Sparrows fly away. She had not. She had stayed. The weight of his observation settled over her. He saw not just what was done to her, but what she did in response. Or what she did not do. They were right about one thing, as she said, the words tasting like ash. The need to be honest, to strip away any illusion he might be forming, was a compulsion. "I have very little conversation. My father believed a woman's education should be practical, ledgers and accounts, not poetry and watercolors. It does not make for sparkling dinner. Repartee, self-sufficient." The word her father had used. The word for a horse that did not need to be fed. "At ease? That what you think I am looking for?" he asked. "A sparkling dinner repartee? It is what everyone looks for at these events, is it not?" Perhaps," he said, closing the small distance between them. He stopped a few feet away, a respectable distance that nonetheless felt intensely close. The scent of winter air and clean linen clung to him. But I have a great deal of sparkling repartee at my disposal. My houses are full of it." "It is, if I am to be honest, Miss Templeton, profoundly dull." Her breath caught. "What I do not have," he continued, his voice dropping even lower, "is a great deal of honesty or kindness to footmen, or the courage to stand still when the easiest thing in the world would be to run." Held out his arm. It was a gesture of stark, simple elegance. "An invitation. The orchestra is playing a waltz," he said. "I find myself in need of a partner. Will you do me the honor, Miss Templeton?" Beatrice stared at his arm, at the fine, dark wool of his coat sleeve. To take it would be to step out of the shadows and into the full, unforgiving glare of the ballroom. It would be an act of war. Every eye would be on them. The whispers would become a roar. "I shall bore him in a fortnight," would become the opening volley of a much larger, more vicious campaign. But to refuse would be to agree with them. To accept that she was a curious stone, fit only to be left in the dark. She thought of the 2 years of slights, of being seated at the far end of tables, of conversations that died the moment she approached. She thought of the shame, a constant, low-grade fever that never quite broke. And she thought of the quiet, steady strength in his eyes. Slowly, deliberately, she lifted her hand and placed it on his arm. The wool was warm beneath her gloved fingers. The honor would be mine, Your Grace," she said, her voice clear and firm. As he led her from the alcove, the ballroom seemed to fall silent. 100 heads turned, 100 pairs of eyes fixed upon them. The Duke of Vane, the cold, untouchable Duke, was leading the ruined Miss Templeton, the little gray sparrow, to the center of the floor. Beatrice kept her eyes on his. She let the whispers wash over her a wave she had been drowning in for 2 years. But for the first time, she did not feel she was drowning alone. He placed a hand on her waist, and as the music swelled, he drew her into the dance. And in the heart of that glittering, hostile world, he did not look away. The waltz was both an eternity and a fleeting moment. Beatrice moved, as if in a dream, her body remembering the steps her mind had thought long forgotten. The Duke was an impeccable dancer, guiding her with a subtle, confident pressure at her waist. He did not speak. He did not need to. Their silence was a fortress against the tide of speculation that surged around them. She could feel the stares like physical things pricking at her skin. She saw Lady Wexhalla's face, a mask of cold fury. She saw her former friend, Eleanor, look away, a flush of what might have been shame on her cheeks. Beatrice focused on the man in front of her. On the way, the light caught the silver threads at his temples, on the firm, unsmiling line of his mouth. He was not smiling, but the coldness was gone from his eyes. In its place was an intense, unwavering focus. He was simply watching her, as if she were the only person in the room. When the music finally faded, he did not release her immediately. For a single, suspended heartbeat, they remained in the center of the floor, the world holding its breath around them. Thank you, Miss Templeton," he said, his voice a low murmur meant only for her. He escorted her from the floor, not back to her shadowed alcove, but towards the grand matriarch of the evening, their hostess, Lady Albright, who looked as though she had swallowed a hornet. The Duke's move was a masterstroke of social strategy. By presenting Beatrice to their hostess, he was not just acknowledging her, he was formally validating her presence. He was forcing the world to see her. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. No one else dared to be openly cruel, not with the Duke's silent approbation resting upon her like a shield, but the whispers followed her, a constant rustling counterpoint to the music. She caught snippets. An astonishing lack of judgment. What can he possibly see in her? Ida's a statement, of course. He disdains us all, and the one that returned, again and again, a cruel and persistent echo. Shale bore him in a fortnight. When the time came for her to leave, her aunt, a timid woman perpetually cowed by society, was fluttering with anxiety. Beatrice, my dear, what have you done? The Duke. People are saying, I know what they are saying. Aunt, Beatrice said, her voice more tired than she intended. She was waiting for their hired carriage in the grand entrance hall when he appeared at her side, once more. Your aunt seems distressed," he observed. My aunt is a barometer for social disapproval," Beatrice replied. Touch of her father's dry, practicality surfacing. The needle is currently pointing to a scandala. A faint smile touched his lips. The first she had seen. It transformed his face, easing the harsh lines around his mouth. "And you, where is your needle pointing?" She met his gaze directly. To exhaustiana, Your Grace. But I am grateful for your intervention. Was not an intervention, Miss Templeton, it was an impulse. One, I find I do not regret. He paused, his expression turning serious. This will not be easy for you. I have made you a target. I was already a target, she said simply. You have merely changed the nature of the ammunition. His stare intensified as if she had said something remarkable. He seemed about to speak again when his own carriage was announced, a magnificent, dark lacquered vehicle, drawn by 2 perfectly matched black horses. A footman in his sober livery held the door. He gave her a slight bow. "Until we meet again, Miss Templeton," and then he was gone. The journey home was a silent one. Her aunt was too afraid to speak, and Beatrice was lost in the chaotic swirl of her own thoughts. The feeling of his hand on her waist, the steady regard of his gray eyes, the astonishing, terrifying fact of his defense. She did not know what he wanted. She did not know what he saw in her. A project, a momentary diversion, a weapon to be used against a society he clearly held in contempt. She was a woman trained in the hard logic of numbers. She knew how to balance a ledger, how to spot an embellished expense, how to calculate risk. And the risk here was immeasurable. To hope even for a moment that the Duke of Vane saw her as anything more than a curious stone was a folly of the highest order, a miscalculation she could not afford to make. Her aunt's letter arrived the next morning. It was not a letter, precisely, but a single sheet of paper, folded and sealed with the Duke of Vania's crest. A footman had delivered it by hand. Beatrice's own hands trembled as she broke the wax. The message was brief, written in a strong, clear hand. "Miss Templeton, I find myself in urgent need of a conversation. I shall call upon you and your aunt this afternoon at 3:00 Vane." It was not a request. It was a statement of intent, a command cloaked in the thinnest veneer of courtesy. Her aunt went into a fresh bout of hysterics. "The Duke coming here to these rooms? What will we do? We have no proper tea service. The upholstery is frayed. He is not coming to inspect the upholstery. Dean." Beatrice set her voice calm, though her heart was hammering against her ribs. She smoothed the heavy paper, the stark black ink. "I find myself in urgent need of a conversation." She had a terrible, sinking feeling that the conversation would be about far more than the weather. She spent the hours until his arrival, in a state of suspended animation, her mind a whirlwind of possibilities, each more unlikely than the last. He would apologize for the scene he had caused. He would offer some form of financial assistance out of pity. He would inform her he was leaving London and wished her well. None of her calculations prepared her for the reality. At precisely 3:00, the Duke of Vane was announced. He filled their small, shabby parlor with his presence, his height, and the impeccable cut of his dark coat making the room seem even smaller and shabbier. He was polite to her aunt, who was reduced to a series of nervous curtsies and incoherent mumbles, but his attention was entirely on Beatrice. After the briefest of pleasantries, he said, "Mrs. Templeton, might I have a word with your niece? In private?" Her aunt looked at Beatrice, her eyes wide with panic. It was a shocking breach of propriety. But one did not refuse the Duke of Vane. With another flustered curtsy, she scurried from the room, leaving a charged silence in her wake. Beatrice remained standing. She would not be at a disadvantage, seated while he loomed over her. Your Grace." He did not waste time with preliminaries. His directness was as bracing as a winter wind. "Miss Templeton, I have a proposition for you." Her heart sank. She had been right. It was business. "I'll find myself," he began, his voice even and measured. "A fave. Due to the terms of my father's will, I must be married by my next birthday, which falls in 3 months' time. If I fail to do so, the control of a significant portion of my unentailed assets, and more importantly, the guardianship of my 2 younger sisters, passes to a board of trustees. Trustees I neither like nor trust." Beatrice stared at him, speechless. This was not what she had expected. "I have spent the season observing the available candidacy," he went on. His tone, that of a man discussing crop yields. They are by and large vapid, grasping, or manipulative. Most are all 3. They are interested in my title and my fortune. They have no interest in my sisters, nor in the running of my household. They perform a version of themselves they believe I wish to see." He paused, his gray eyes locking onto hers. "You do not, I do not what? Your Grace?" she whispered. "Perform. You are yourself, even when it is to your detriment. Last night, You told me the truth about your education. You did not attempt to charm or flatter. You simply stated a fact. It is a fact, she said, a rather unappealing one for a prospective duchess. The words were out before she could stop them, a flash of her innate, dry pragmatism. On the contrary, he said, it is the most appealing thing I have heard all season. I do not need a duchess who can quote poetry. I need a duchess who can run 3 estates, manage a household staff of over 200, and understand that a home is more than a backdrop for parties. I need a woman of intelligence, integrity, and fortitude. I need a woman who does not flee when the world turns against her. He took a step closer. The air crackled between them. I am offering you a contract, Miss Templeton. A marriage of convenience. In exchange for the title of Duchess of Vane and all the security that entails, you would agree to be my wife in name. You would manage my households. You would act as a chatelaine, and in time, a sister to my own. There would be no other expectations. It would be a business arrangement, a partnership. She stared at him, her mind reeling. It was insane. He, the most sought-after bachelor in England, was proposing marriage to her, the ruined Beatrice Templeton, not out of love, not out of passion, but as a solution to a logistical problem. It was the most romantic, and the most devastating, thing that had ever happened to her. He was offering her a crown, but he was telling her plainly it was made of iron, not gold. He was offering her a home, but it was a position, not a haven. He was saving her from social ruin, but he was chaining her to a man who saw her as a competent administrator. Her first instinct was to say yes. A desperate, clawing yes that came from the part of her that was so tired of being poor, of being pitied, of being a ghost. The title alone would silence the whispers. The security would be a balm to her frayed nerves. But then she met his eyes, steady, calm, expectant. He was waiting for her to be the practical, pragmatic woman he thought she was. He was waiting for her to see the sense in the bargain. And that was when her own quiet, unyielding pride asserted itself. The part of her that had stood still in the alcove. The part of her that had refused to run. She would not be a hired duchess. Before I answer anything, she said, her voice astonishingly level. You will tell me the truth. All of it. A flicker of surprise crossed his face. He had expected an immediate acceptance or a flustered refusal. He had not expected terms. I have told you the truth, he said. You have told me the practicalities, she corrected him gently. You have not told me why you chose me, and do not tell me it is because I was kind to a footman. There are dozens of kind women in London. You passed them all by. You created a scandal by dancing with me. A scandal you are now proposing to solve with marriage. Why? He was silent for a long moment, studying her. It felt like being weighed and measured. She did not flinch. She had been weighed and measured her entire life, and always found wanting. She would not look away now. Because, he said at last, the words seeming to be pulled from a great depth. The lie they told about you, the one that ruined you. I know it to be a lie. The floor seemed to drop away from beneath her feet. The man who spread it, Lord Ashworth, the Duke continued, his voice hardening, is a degenerate gambler. He attempted to settle a debt with me by offering information, slander he could use to ruin a rival. He boasted of how he had already destroyed one young lady's reputation when she refused his suit. He was very specific. He was very proud. The Duke's jaw tightened. I did not pay him. I did, however, remember the name of the young lady. Beatrice sank into a nearby chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her, all this time. For 2 years, she had borne the shame of a lie, never knowing that one of the most powerful men in England held the truth. Why? Why did you not say anything? She whispered. To whom? He asked, the question stark and logical. To have me, a man known for his cynicism, suddenly champion the innocence of a ruined debutante. It would have been dismissed as another of my perversities. It would have caused a greater scandal, centered you in it, and achieved nothing. There was no proof, only the word of a blackguard against my own. It would not have restored you. It would only have entangled you with me, to your further detriment. He was right, of course he was right. His logic was as cold and flawless as a diamond. But last night, he said, something changed. When I saw you enduring them, with a quiet grace that was more powerful than any defense, I realized I had been a coward. I had the truth, and I did nothing with it. I let you suffer their slings and arrows because it was the path of least resistance. He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw a crack in his wintry facade. A flash of something that looked like self-recrimination. This offer, he said, is not charity, Miss Templeton. And it is not merely a business proposition. It is an attempt to set a thing right. In the only way I know how, she finally understood. This was not about finding a competent duchess. This was about his own conscience. She was an entry on his moral ledger that had been left unbalanced, and this was his way of correcting it. It was still a transaction, but the currency was not convenience. It was guilt. She took a deep breath, the air steadying her. She was on solid ground again, the ground of contracts and obligations, the ground she understood. I see, she said. And she did. Then, if we are to consider this a partnership, we must have conditions. Again and again. That flicker of surprise. And this time, something else. Respect. Name them, he said. First. She began, her voice gaining strength. If I am to be your duchess, I will have full authority over the households, the accounts, the staff, the management, all of it. I will not be a figurehead. Agreed, he said, without hesitation. A second. Your sisters. You say you wish for me to be a sister to them. I will not be a replacement for their mother. I will not be a governess with a grander title. I will be a friend, if they will have me. But I will not force their affection, nor will I tolerate them being forced to show me any. It must be earned. He nodded slowly. They are difficult. They have driven off 4 governesses in the last year. Then I will be the one who stays, she said simply, but on my own terms. Agreed. She looked down at her hands, clasped in her lap. The last condition was the hardest, the most necessary. And third, she said, looking up to meet his gaze. You have said there will be no other expectations. I must be clear. This will be a true partnership, Your Grace. Which means we will be honest with one another. I will not perform affection for you, and I expect none from you, but I will not be ignored until needed. I will not be a silent partner in my own marriage. We will dine together. We will speak. We will be allies. Or this will not work. She was asking for his time, his attention. She was asking for the one thing the whispers said she could never hold. She'll bore him in a fortnight. The silence stretched. He was looking at her with an expression she could not decipher. It was not cold, not anymore. It was thoughtful, intense. He was truly seeing her now, not as a problem to be solved or a wrong to be righted, but as a woman, laying out the articles of her own surrender, and in doing so, claiming a victory. Your conditions are more than reasonable. He said at last. They are wise. He extended a hand to her. Do we have an accord? She looked at his hand, strong and steady. This was it. The precipice. A leap into a life she could never have imagined. A loveless marriage to a man of winter, in exchange for safety, purpose, and a name restored. It was a bargain struck in guilt and pragmatism, with no room for sentiment. A ledger perfectly balanced. She placed her hand in his. His grip was firm and warm. We have an accord, Your Grace. His thumb brushed lightly over her knuckles. A fleeting, almost imperceptible gesture. Lucius, he said quietly. My name is Lucius. And in that moment, Beatrice Templeton, the ruined debutante, the curious stone, the Gray Sparrow, became the future Duchess of Vane. The world would not understand. They would whisper. They would watch. They would wait for her to fail. Let them, she thought. She had work to do. The announcement of their engagement landed on London society, like a thunderclap on a clear day. The whispers did not cease. They intensified, mutating from speculation into a kind of furious, bewildered gossip. It was a 9-day wonder, a topic dissected over teacups, and in the back rooms of gentlemen's clubs, the consensus was grimly predictable. He was mad. She was a cunning opportunist who had somehow trapped him. It was a fleeting infatuation, a ducal whim that would end in tears and social oblivion for her once he tired of his game. The echoed wound returned sharper than ever. Shale bore him in a fortnight. Now the fortnight had a starting date. They were married by special license a week later in the Duca's London residence, a vast, imposing house on St. James's Square. The ceremony was a quiet, stark affair, attended only by her trembling aunt, Lucius's grim-faced solicitor, and his 2 sisters, who watched the proceedings with expressions of unnerving neutrality. Eleonora, at 17, was a younger, sharper version of Lucius, with the same clear gray eyes and an air of watchful intelligence. Sophia, at 14, was paler, quieter, her gaze perpetually fixed on the floor. They greeted Beatrice with flawless courtesy and not a single flicker of warmth. They were their father's daughters, Beatrice thought, contained, controlled, waiting. Beatrice had braced herself for their hostility. She was, after all, the stranger foisted upon them by their brother's strange decree. She had not expected this unnerving, polite emptiness. It was like facing a wall of smooth, impenetrable glass. After the ceremony, Lucius took her to the library. It was his domain, a cavernous room lined from floor to ceiling with books, the air thick with the scent of old paper and beeswax. A low fire crackled in the grate, doing little to dispel the room's magnificent chill. The household accounts," he said, gesturing to a formidable stack of leather-bound ledgers on a vast mahogany desk. "My steward, Mr. Finch, will present them to you weekly. You have full authority, as we agreed." And it was her scepter and orb, the tangible proof of her new role. She ran a hand over the cool, smooth leather of the top volume. Thank you. A will be at my club for much of the afternoon. We will dine together at 8. He paused at the door. A Finch is a good man, but he is a traditional. He may require some convincing. The first test. I am well versed in convincing traditional men. Your Grace, she said, her voice dry. A Lucius, he corrected her, his expression unreadable, and then he was gone. She was alone. The Duchess of Vane, alone in a library the size of her aunt's entire apartment, with a stack of ledgers as her only company. A strange sense of calm settled over her. This, she understood. Numbers did not lie. They did not whisper behind their hands, they were honest. She opened the first ledger. The first few weeks were a battle fought on silent, domestic fronts. Mr. Finch, a man whose spine seemed to have been forged from pig iron, treated her with a deference so exaggerated it bordered on insolence. He presented his books with a flourish, clearly expecting her to glance at the totals and dismiss him. On the 3rd day, she found an error. It was small, a transposition of numbers in the column for stable expenditures, but it was there. She pointed it out quietly, tapping the page with her finger. Finch's face went rigid. A minor clerical oversight. Your Grace, sir, of course, she said smoothly, but an oversight that, had it been in the other direction, would have cost the estate £20. Please correct it, he did. And the following week, when he presented the ledgers, his deference was a fraction less pronounced. His eyes held a new, grudging respect. It was a small victory, but it was a start. The staff watched her with 100 pairs of eyes. They were Lucius's people, loyal to him and to the memory of his late parents. They saw her as an interloper, a mystery. She did not issue grand orders. She did not try to change things. She simply watched. and learned. She learned the house Medesa names. She noticed when a kitchen boy had a cough and sent for the physician. She spoke to the head gardener about his late wife's favorite roses, which he still tended in a sheltered corner of the garden. She did not try to win them over, she simply treated them as people, not furniture. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the atmosphere began to shift. The curtsies became less stiff. The footman met her eye. The housekeeper, a formidable woman named Mrs. Gable, offered her a cup of tea one afternoon without being asked. Her husband remained an enigma. They dined together each night, as she had stipulated. Their conversations were polite, measured, and carefully devoid of personal revelation. They spoke of estate matters, of politics, of news from the papers. He was an intelligent and often surprisingly witty conversationalist. He listened intently when she spoke, his gaze steady and focused. He never once appeared bored, but he kept his walls firmly in place. He would share an observation about a tenant farmer's new crop rotation, but never an opinion on the book he was reading. He would describe a political debate in the House of Lords, but never how it made him feel. He was a fortress, and she had been granted access to the public rooms, but the keep remained locked and guarded. She did not push. She had her own fortress to maintain. She was the Duchess of Vane, a woman of purpose and position. She was not the lonely, frightened girl who had stood in the alcove at Lady Albright's ball. She told herself this every morning. Sometimes she almost believed it. The true challenge was not the staff or the ledgers, it was his sisters. Eleonora and Sophia were ghosts in their own home. They took their lessons with their governess, a perpetually exhausted-looking woman named Miss Ingram. They took their meals in the nursery, though Eleonora was surely too old for it. They rarely spoke unless spoken to. Beatrice tried to draw them out, inviting them to take tea with her, asking about their studies. Eleonora would answer in polite, clipped sentences, her eyes giving nothing away. Sophia would simply stare at her plate, her blonde hair falling like a curtain to hide her face. They were not rude. They were simply absent. Ah, they are grieving. Mrs. Gable told her one afternoon, her voice low. It is 2 years since their mother passed, the Duca. He does not speak of it. The house went quiet, and it has been quiet ever since. He thinks if he does not acknowledge the wound it will heal, but it only festers. The word struck Beatrice with the force of a physical blow, a house frozen in grief. A man who built walls, not just around himself, but around his family, believing it was a form of protection. That evening, at dinner, she broke their unspoken rule. "I passed the music room today," she said, her voice carefully neutral. The pianoforte is a beautiful instrument." Lucius looked up from his plate, his expression guarded. She continued gently. Mrs. Gable tells me your mother was a fine musician." A muscle tightened in his jaw. She was a. The words were clipped. The subject was closed. Beatrice did not press. But the next afternoon, she went to the music room. It was a lovely, light-filled space, but it felt cold and unused. A thin layer of dust covered the closed pianoforte. She lifted the lid. The keys were yellowed, but they seemed to be in tune. She sat down and, after a moment's hesitation, began to play. She was not a gifted musician, like his mother had apparently been. Her skills were modest, honed by a practical father who believed a little music was a necessary social grace, but nothing more. She played a simple sonatina by Clementi, the notes hesitant at first, then gaining confidence as they filled the silent room. She did not know how long she had been playing when she sensed she was no longer alone. She looked up. Sophia was standing in the doorway, her small frame silhouetted against the light from the hall. She was clutching a worn, velvet-covered book to her chest. Her eyes, wide and startled, were fixed on Beatrice's hands. Beatrice's fingers faltered on the keys. She let the last chord hang in the air, then fade into silence. "I am sorry," Beatrice said softly. "I did not mean to disturb you." Sophia did not answer. She just stood there watching. "It's a lovely instrument." Beatrice tried again. Your mother must have loved it very much." At the mention of her mother, a flicker of something crossed Sophia's face. She hugged the velvet book tighter. Beatrice had a sudden thought. "I am not a very good player," she confessed, with a small, self-deprecating smile. "I am much better with numbers. But I do like to try." She looked at the sheet music on the stand, a complex piece by Bach that was far beyond her skill. This was your mother's, I imagine?" Sophia gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. She must have been wonderful," Beatrice said, her voice full of genuine admiration. "She did not say I can play it for you. She did not say let me show you. She simply acknowledged the loss, the talent that was gone." She closed the pianoforte gently. "Oh well. I have accounts to see to A." She stood and walked towards the door, giving Sophia a wide berth, not wanting to frighten her away. As she passed, she glanced at the book. The girl was clutching. It was not a book. It was a music album, bound in faded blue velvet. She said nothing. She simply walked out, leaving the door open behind her. She did not know if it was the right thing to do. She was navigating a landscape of grief, without a map. But as she walked down the hall, she heard it. A single hesitant note, plucked from the pianoforte. Then another, and another. A fragile, searching melody in the vast, silent house. It was a beginning. The fortnight passed, then a month. The whispers in society faded to a low murmur. The Duke and his strange, quiet Duchess were seen at the opera, at obligatory dinners, at a handful of balls. He was unfailingly attentive. She was unfailingly composed. They were a portrait of placid marital accord, and it was driving the gossips to distraction. They were waiting for the boredom to set in, for the cracks to appear. But the surface remained smooth. The phrase had lost some of its sting. It was a lie, after all. He was not bored. Their dinners were the anchor of her day. He would listen to her talk about the estate budgets, asking sharp, insightful questions. He would notice a detail she had overlooked, not to criticize, but to understand. And she in turn learned to read the subtle shifts in his mood, the slight tightening of his jaw that meant a debate in the Lords had been taxing, the faint, rare glimmer of amusement in his eyes when she recounted a particularly absurd social encounter. They were allies. They were partners. They were two people living under the same roof, sharing their meals and their days, and yet they remained miles apart. The keep was still locked. The breakthrough with Sophia in the music room had been followed by a series of tentative steps. The younger sister began to appear in rooms where Beatrice was never speaking, but simply present. She would sit in a corner of the library while Beatrice worked on the accounts, turning the pages of her own book. One afternoon, Beatrice looked up to find Sophia watching her. Her expression, one of intense curiosity. Is it very difficult?" Sophia asked, her voice barely a whisper. It was the first question she had ever asked her. The accounts. Beatrice smiled. Not if you enjoy puzzles. All just a story. Really the story of a year, told in numbers, where the money came from, where it went. You can see the harvest, the cost of a new roof for the tenant farm, the price of candles for a single month. Sophia's eyes widened. A story? Of the best kind. Beatrice said true one? She did not offer to teach her. She simply answered the question. But the next day, Sophia pulled a small stool closer to the desk and watched, silent and absorbed, as Beatrice's pen moved across the page, translating the life of the estate into columns of neat, precise figures. Eleonora remained distant. She was polite, cool, and utterly unreadable. She treated Beatrice with the same formal courtesy she would a distant cousin, never seeking her out, never offering a word more than was necessary. Beatrice sensed that of the two sisters, she would be the harder to win. She was the guardian of her brother's trust and her mother's memory, and she would not surrender either easily. One rainy Tuesday, a crisis arrived in the form of a panicked letter from the steward of Blackwood, their northernmost estate. A fever had broken out in the village adjoining the manor. Several tenants were gravely ill, the local physician was overwhelmed, and the harvest was at risk as workers fell sick. Beatrice brought the letter to Lucius in the library. He read it, his face grim. "I will have to go north. I will come with you." "Ah," she said immediately. He looked up surprised. That is not necessary. It could be dangerous." "The Fevre, I am your wife and the Duchess of Vane," she said, her voice steady. The people of Blackwood are my people now, too. My father insisted. I learned basic nursing. I know how to prepare feverfew infusions, how to keep a patient cool, how to ensure a sick room is kept clean. I may be of some use. And if not," she added, with a touch of her old pragmatism, at least, I can help organize the distribution of supplies. It is a matter of logistics, after all." He stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. She thought he would refuse. She had overstepped, perhaps. Presumed a role she had not yet earned. Very well," he said finally. We leave in the morning." The journey north was arduous. 2 days of relentless travel over rutted roads. They spoke little, the gravity of their mission hanging between them. When they arrived at Blackwood, the situation was as dire as the stewardess' letter had suggested. The air in the village hung heavy with fear and the scent of wood smoke and sickness. Beatrice did not hesitate. She set up a makeshift infirmary in the estate's great hall, directing the household staff to bring clean linens, fresh water, and all the blankets they could find. She went with Lucius to the village, her face calm and her voice steady as she spoke to the frightened families, assessing their needs. She was not a grand lady playing at charity. She was practical, efficient, and deeply competent. She tied on an apron over her simple traveling dress and set to work, bathing fevered brows, spooning broth into the mouths of those too weak to feed themselves, and keeping meticulous notes on each patient's condition. Lucius worked alongside her, his ducal authority, securing supplies and organizing the healthy tenants into work groups to bring in what they could of the harvest. He was not above carrying buckets of water or chopping wood for the fires. He watched Beatrice, his initial surprise turning into a quiet, profound respect. He saw her moving through the makeshift hospital, her hands gentle, her voice a low murmur of encouragement. He saw the weary gratitude in the tenants' eyes as they looked at her. He had married her for her integrity and her mind. He had not anticipated this bottomless well of quiet, practical compassion. He had thought he was getting a partner. He was beginning to realize he had gotten something far more. On the third night, they were sitting by the fire in the great hall, exhausted. The worst of the fever seemed to have broken, but they were not yet clear. Beatrice was staring into the flames, her face pale with fatigue. You should rest," he said. So should you," she countered, not looking at him. A comfortable silence fell between them. It was different from their silences in London. This one was forged in shared labor and shared risk. It was solid. "Real? Why did you learn nursing?" he asked, breaking the quiet. "It is not a typical skill for a young lady. My father believed in being prepared for any eventuality," she said, a faint wry smile touching her lips. He was an optimist in his investments, but a pessimist in all other matters. "He thought the world was a fundamentally unstable place. He wanted me to be able to survive it," said she finally turned to look at him, her eyes clear in the firelight. "It seems he was right." He was," Lucius said, quietly. He found himself wanting to tell her something true. The urge was unfamiliar, and it unnerved him. My father was the opposite. He believed the world was a machine built to serve him. He believed feeling was a weakness. He taught me that control was the only thing that mattered. It was the first piece of himself he had ever offered her, a small cracked piece of the fortress wall. Beatrice's expression softened. "And do you believe that?" He looked at her, at the smudge of soot on her cheek, at the weariness in her eyes, at the unyielding strength that held her upright. He thought of her playing the pianoforte for a ghost, of her explaining ledgers to a silent child, of her facing down his formidable steward. He thought of her now, in the heart of a crisis, a beacon of calm competence. "No," he said, the word raw and honest. "I am beginning to believe I was wrong about a great many things." Saw. Before she could respond, a cry came from the far side of the hall. A young boy, one of the sickest, was in the throes of a coughing fit. Beatrice was on her feet in an instant, hurrying to his side. Lucius watched her go. He watched her kneel by the child's cot, her hand gentle on his back, her voice a low, soothing murmur. And in that moment, watching her, he felt the last of his carefully constructed defenses begin to crumble. The bargain he had made, the cool, logical contract, seemed like a thing from another lifetime. He had asked for a duchess. He had been given a lifeline. He was in more danger now than he had ever been when he was merely lonely. He was beginning to hope. They stayed at Blackwood for 3 weeks. By the time they returned to London, the fever had passed, the harvest was saved, and the name of the new duchess was spoken with a reverence that bordered on awe by the tenants. Stories traveled faster than carriages, and when they arrived back at St. James's Square, something had fundamentally shifted. The staff greeted her not just with respect, but with genuine warmth. Mrs. Gablee's smile was unforced. Mr. Finch presented his ledgers as a trusted subordinate to a commander. And the sisters were waiting for her in the entrance hall. Sophia ran to her, a thing Beatrice had never seen her do, and threw her arms around her waist in a fierce, clumsy hug. You came back," she whispered into the folds of Beatrice's dress. "Of course I came back," Beatrice said, her own voice thick with emotion as she smoothed the girlish hair. Over Sophia's head, she met Eleanor's gaze. The older sister had not moved, but the cool neutrality was gone from her eyes. In its place was a look of searching, hesitant respect. "A welcome home, Your Grace," Eleanor said. The title was the same, but the tone was entirely different. That night, for the first time, the sisters joined them for dinner. The conversation was stilted at first, but Beatrice, aided by a quietly supportive Lucius, drew them out. Sophia, it turned out, had a passion for botany and an encyclopedic knowledge of the wild flowers at their country estate. Eleonora, beneath her reserved exterior, possessed a sharp, incisive mind and a dry wit that was a startling echo of her brother's. As she watched Lucius smile at a particularly sharp comment from Eleonora, Beatrice felt a pang of something warm and unfamiliar in her chest. It felt, terrifyingly, like happiness. This was a family, and she was a part of it. The 6-month anniversary of their wedding approached. The London season was in full swing, and they were expected to host their first grand ball. It was a prospect Beatrice faced with a mixture of quiet confidence and lingering dread. It would be the ultimate test. The world that had condemned her would now be her guest. She would be the one standing at the top of the staircase, the Duchess in her own home. Lady Wexhall and her sister, Lady Eleanor, would be there. Beatrice had seen to the invitations herself. It was not a matter of forgiveness, it was a matter of strategy. To exclude them would be a sign of fear. As she planned the event, her practical mind took over. She met with Mrs. Gable and the chef, poring over menus. She consulted with the head gardener about the floral arrangements. And she reviewed the budget, her pen flying across the pages, ensuring that the Duke of Vania's first ball under her management would be magnificent, but not wasteful. It was during this process that she found it. She was cross-referencing the household ledgers from the past 3 years, looking for patterns in seasonal expenditures. Her eye was drawn to a series of payments, made quarterly, to a jeweler in Bond Street. They were substantial sums, listed under the vague heading of a household acquisitions. This was odd. The late Duchess had been known for her simple tastes, and Lucius himself had no interest in fripperies. Curious, she pulled the ledgers from the year before. The payments were there, too, and the year before that. Always the same jeweler. Always the same vague description. But in the oldest ledger, from just after the late Duchess's death, she found the original entry. It was more specific, a settlement of the late Duchess's outstanding accounts. The payments had continued long after any legitimate debt should have been settled. Someone was siphoning money from the estate, hiding it under the cover of a dead woman's name. A cold dread washed over her. The amounts were not huge, not enough to threaten the Vane fortune, but the betrayal was staggering. And the method was clever. Mr. Finch, who only saw the annual totals, would not have noticed. Lucius, who trusted his steward and had little patience for the minutiae of accounts, only someone with her specific, painstaking attention to detail would have spotted the pattern. Her mind raced. Who had access? Who could authorize such payments? Only someone with a position of intimate trust within the household. She sat back in her chair, the ledger open before her, the neat columns of numbers suddenly looking like a web. She thought of the people who surrounded her. Mrs. Gable, the soul of loyalty. Mr. Finch, gruff but honest to the core. And then another name came to her, a name that made no sense. Miss Ingram, the governess? Why? The woman was quiet, mousy, perpetually tired. It seemed impossible. But she had been with the family for 5 years. She had been there before the late Duchess's death. She knew the household routines. She had the trust of the family. Beatrice felt a chill that had nothing to do with the drafty library. She needed proof. She said nothing to Lucius. This was her domain. The accounts. The household. She would not bring him an accusation without evidence. It would be a violation of their contract. For the next week, she was a quiet, relentless investigator. She made a discreet visit to the jeweler in Bond Street. On the pretext of commissioning a piece for the ball, she described the payments, feigning confusion over a household account. The jeweler, eager to please a duchess, was helpful. The payments, he confirmed, were collected in person each quarter. He described the person who collected them, a woman, small, plainly dressed, with brown hair and spectacles. Miss Ingram. The motive still eluded her. It was not simple greed. The amounts were too regular, too controlled. It felt like something else. The night of the ball arrived. The Vane townhouse was ablaze with light. Hundreds of candles glittered in the chandeliers, reflecting off polished floors and gleaming silks. The scent of roses and beeswax filled the air. Beatrice stood at the top of the grand staircase, Lucius at her side. She wore a gown of deep midnight blue silk, a startling contrast to her old gray. A simple string of Vane diamonds, a gift from her husband that morning, encircled her throat. She felt his gaze on her and looked up. "You are beautiful, Beatrice," he said, his voice low and for her ears only. It was the first time he had ever said such a thing. It was not flattery. It was a simple statement of fact, and it sent a jolt of warmth through her. "You are nervous," he observed. "I am on display," she corrected him softly. There is a difference," he smiled, that rare transit smile. They are not here to judge you anymore. They are here to be judged by you." He was right. As the guests arrived, their bows and curtsies were not for the ruined Miss Templeton, but for the formidable Duchess of Vane. She was the mistress of this house. She held the power. She saw Lady Wexhall and Lady Eleanor arrive. Lady Wexhall's smile was brittle as glass. Eleanor met her eyes for a moment, then looked away, a faint, guilty flush on her cheeks. Beatrice inclined her head, a gesture of cool, regal acknowledgement. She had won. But her mind was not on her social victory. It was on the quiet, mousy woman who was currently upstairs, supposedly watching over the sisters. Halfway through the evening, she excused herself. "I am going to check on the girls," she murmured to Lucius. He nodded, his eyes questioning but not stopping her. She slipped away from the noise and the light, her silk skirts rustling in the quiet of the upper floors. She did not go to the nursery. She went to Miss Ingram's room. The door was unlocked. She slipped inside. The room was Spartan, impeccably neat. A quick search revealed nothing. She was about to give up when she noticed a small, locked writing desk in the corner. It was a long shot, but she had to know. She remembered seeing a ring of household keys in Mrs. Gable's office. It took her 10 precious minutes to retrieve them and return, her heart pounding with every step. The third key she tried turned the lock. Inside the desk was a small personal ledger and a sheaf of letters. Beatrice's hands trembled as she read the first one. It was from a sanatorium in the countryside. It was a bill for the care of a patient named Mr. Ingram, the governess's brother. The letters detailed his long, slow decline from a wasting illness, the mounting costs of his care. The ledger was a heartbreaking document. On one side, Miss Ingram had detailed every shilling she had taken from the Vane estate. On the other, she had detailed every shilling she had spent on her brother's care. The two columns balanced. To the penny, it was not greed. It was desperation. A quiet, unassuming woman, trapped by love and circumstance, had turned to crime to care for the only family she had left. Beatrice felt a wave of pity so profound it almost buckled her knees. She also felt a cold knot of fear. This changed everything. She could not simply expose a thief. She would be destroying a woman who had acted out of love. Suddenly, a floorboard creaked in the hallway. Beatrice froze, the letters still in her hand. The door opened. Eleanora stood there, her face pale, her eyes wide with shock. She had clearly followed Beatrice. Her gaze dropped from Beatrice's face to the open desk, the scattered letters. What are you doing?" Eleonora whispered, her voice trembling with accusation. You're spying on her." Before Beatrice could answer, another figure appeared in the doorway behind Eleonora. It was Miss Ingram. She took in the scene of Beatrice, holding the letters, the open desk, Eleonora's shocked face, and a small broken sound escaped her lips. Her face crumpled. I can explain," the governess stammered, wringing her hands. There is no need, Beatrice," said her voice surprisingly calm. She looked at Eleonora, whose expression was hardening from shock into righteous anger. Your Grace. This is not what it appears." It appears," Eleonora said, her voice sharp with the Vane family steel, "that you are a thief. You have been stealing from my brother." Her eyes, so like Lucius's, flashed with fury. "And you," she said, turning on Beatrice, "are no better, prowling through her room like a common burglar." This was it. The moment she had dreaded. The fragile trust she had built was about to shatter. Eleonora, the final holdout, had found proof that she was exactly the kind of woman the gossips had always claimed she was. Eleonora, listen to me," Beatrice began, but it was too late. A new voice, cold and authoritative, cut through the tension. What is going on here?" Lucius stood in the doorway, his face a thunderous mask. He had come looking for her. He took in the scene in a single sweeping glance. The weeping governess, his furious sister, and his wife, standing over an open desk with letters in her hand. The tableau was damning. Lucius, thank God," Eleonora cried, rushing to her brother's side. "She is a thief! Miss Ingram has been stealing from us." And the Duchess saw she was searching her room. Lucius's gaze fell on Beatrice. His expression was utterly terrifyingly unreadable. The warmth of the earlier evening was gone, replaced by the familiar winter. This was the test. The ultimate test of their partnership, of his trust. He had every reason to believe the worst of her. She met his gaze, her own clear and steady, and held up the letters. Your Grace," she said, her voice quiet but carrying in the silent room. We have a problem. And it is a matter for the Duke and Duchess of Vane to solve together." She did not defend herself. She did not accuse. She stated a fact and included him in the solution. She held her ground. She did not run. He looked from her to his sister, to the sobbing governess. He saw the evidence, and he saw his wife. the woman who had faced down gossips, fever, and his own coldness with unwavering integrity. The woman who had told him she would not be a silent partner. He took a deep breath. Eleonora, he said, his voice firm, but no longer angry. Leave us. But Luciasa. And now, his sister stared, shocked, but she obeyed. With one last betrayed look at Beatrice, she swept from the room. Lucius closed the door, shutting them in with the weeping governess. He walked, not to Beatrice, but to Miss Ingram. Is it true?" he asked, his voice unexpectedly gentle. Miss Ingram could only nod, her shoulders shaking with sobs. My brother Hayes, all I have a." Lucius looked at Beatrice. The question was, in his eyes, what do we do? And in that moment, Beatrice knew she had won. He had not condemned her. He had not questioned her. He had trusted her. He had seen the damning evidence and chosen to trust the woman he had married. The debt is a household matter," Beatrice said softly, answering his unspoken question. She walked over to the desk and placed the letters and the personal ledger back inside. "It seems the estate has been extending a loan to a trusted member of staff in a time of great need. An informal loan, which I will now formalize. We will arrange for Miss Ingram's salary to be adjusted to cover the repayments over a period of time that is manageable for her. And we will send the vain physician to the sanatorium to consult on her brother's case." She looked at Miss Ingram, whose head had snapped up, her face a mask of disbelief and dawning, tear-streaked hope. "You are a valued member of this household, Miss Ingram," Beatrice continued, her voice kind. "If you had come to us, we would have helped you. I hope you know that now, Ton." She closed the writing desk and turned the key. Locking the secret away, she held the key out to Miss Ingram. This is a private matter. It will go no further." As a governess took the key, her hand trembling violently. "Your Grace, I don't know what to say." "Say nothing," Lucius said, his voice rough with an emotion Beatrice couldn't name. "The Duchess has spoken. Go and compose yourself. We will discuss the details tomorrow." Miss Ingram fled, leaving Beatrice and Lucius alone in the small, quiet room. The distant sound of the orchestra drifted up from downstairs. He stood there, just looking at her, and the walls he had kept around himself for so long seemed to dissolve into dust. "The fortress was gone. I married you to right a wrong I had done," he said, his voice low and raw. "I told myself it was a matter of honor. A debt to be paid." He took a step towards her, then another, until he was standing directly in front of her. He reached out and gently brushed the smudge of dust from her cheek, his touch sending a shockwave through her. "I was a fool," he whispered. "I thought I was offering you a rescue. But it was I who was drowning, eh?" He looked into her eyes and she saw everything he had kept hidden. The loneliness, the grief, the weight of a title he had never wanted, and something else. Something new and terrifying and wonderful. "Adabaris ha," he said, his voice breaking on her name. "Yeah," but he didn't finish. He didn't need to. He lowered his head and kissed her. It was not a polite, passionless kiss of a marriage of convenience. It was a kiss of searing honesty, of gratitude, of 6 months of unspoken words and unacknowledged feelings. It was the kiss of a man coming home. When he finally drew back, they were both breathless. He rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. The whispers," she murmured, the old wound making one last faint protest. They said I would bore you." He let out a short, rough laugh. My life before you. Beatrice, that was boring. It was a silent, gray, orderly existence. You brought a color and noise and ledgers." He opened his eyes, and they were shining with a warmth that rivaled the fire downstairs. "You brought life back into me." A different whisper echoed in her mind then, her own words, from what felt like a lifetime ago. "I will be the one who stays." And in staying, she had found not just a home, but a heart that beat in time with her own. 6 months to the day after their wedding, Beatrice was in the music room. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Sophia was seated at the pianoforte, her fingers moving confidently over the keys as she played a piece from her mother's velvet-bound album. The melody was no longer hesitant and fragile, it was full, rich, and joyful. Eleonora sat nearby, reading, but she was not absorbed in her book. She was listening, a small, genuine smile on her face. When the piece ended, she applauded softly. "Ah, that was beautiful, Sophia." Beatrice felt a swell of quiet contentment. This was the new normal. The house was no longer silent. It was filled with music, with the sound of Sophia's laughter and Eleonora's dry wit. The ghosts had not been banished, but they had been given peace. The portrait of the late Duchess still hung in the main gallery, and Sophia often placed a fresh flower on the pianoforte in her memory. They had not replaced what was lost. They had simply made room for new life to grow alongside it. Lucius appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame, just watching them. He no longer looked like a man made of winter. The harsh lines around his eyes had softened. He smiled when he caught Beatrice's eye, a warm, easy smile that was just for her. The whispers of society had long since died away, replaced by a grudging admiration. The Duchess of Vane was no longer a curiosity. She was a power, respected for her intelligence, her grace, and the quiet, unshakable devotion of her husband. Lady Wexhall now offered greetings that were almost convincingly cordial. Lady Eleanor had, in a quiet moment at a recent tea, offered Beatrice a sincere, if awkward, apology. Beatrice had accepted it with the same quiet grace with which she accepted everything else. Later that evening, she and Lucius were in the library. A comfortable fire crackled in the hearth. She was at the great desk, but she was not reviewing accounts. She was writing a letter to her aunt, describing the sisters' progress. Lucius was in his favorite armchair, reading, but she knew he was not truly reading. He was watching her. What is it?" she asked, without looking up. "I was just thinking," he said, his voice a low, contented rumble. "About our contract." She put down her pen and turned to him. Yes. The business arrangement." A corner of his mouth lifted. "Indeed. I fear I am in breach of it." Oh. "In what way?" she asked, playing along a condition 3. He said, his expression turning serious, though his eyes twinkled. "No affection will be performed or forced. I find I am performing a great deal of it. And it is not forced in the slightest. I am a willing, and I hope not entirely incompetent, participant. She felt a blush rise to her cheeks. I see. And do you wish to renegotiate the terms?" He set his book aside and rose, coming to stand behind her chair. He placed his hands on her shoulders, his touch warm and firm. "A wish to dissolve the contract entirely," he said, his lips close to her ear, "and replace it with a different one." "And what would the terms of this new contract be?" she whispered. Unconditional," he murmured, his hands sliding down to rest on her arms, drawing her back against him, irrevocable. "And based on a single, non-negotiable clause. Which is A." He bent down and pressed a soft kiss to her temple. That the Duke of Vane loves his wife more than he ever thought it was possible to love anyone. And that he will spend the rest of his life showing her. Tears welled in her eyes, but they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. She turned in her chair and wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him down to her. I believe," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "that I can agree to those terms." He kissed her, then a long, slow kiss, full of love and promise. The fire crackled, the house was quiet, but it was a warm, living quiet, the sound of a family at peace. She had walked into a house full of silence and secrets, a woman the world had written off. They said she would be a footnote in a duca's life, a passing fancy. They had given her a fortnight. He had given her forever. She had become not a replacement, not a bargain discharged, but the woman who stayed. She was Beatrice. Duchess of Vane, and she was home. What do you think is the most powerful form of courage? Is it the grand public gesture, or the quiet daily act of endurance? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We loved bringing this story of quiet strength and unexpected love to you. If you enjoyed it, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel for more stories that warm the heart. We love hearing from you, so please also let us know where in the world you are watching from today. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to sharing another story with you very soon.